Hello readers, so we're going to try a new format for our reading videos. I'm going to go through these slides, we're going to read a couple stories and see what we're going to be talking about today. So our learning targets are, we will learn the basic components to traditional literature. Performance of understanding, we will discuss as a class our noticings about common themes in traditional literature. This can be done in the comments. Success criteria, we can recall one thing we learned about traditional literature. So I'm going to ask you in your assignment, what did you learn? Last week we finished our informational text reading. Today we're going to be introduced to our new unit, traditional literature. So obviously we finished this before Thanksgiving break, and this is for now. What is traditional literature? So these are stories that are passed down through oral storytelling from generation to generation, and they fall under a broad term, traditional literature. So that means there's not one specific thing or one specific type that allows it to be traditional. Over time and through many tellers, these stories are altered. They're drawing upon each new generation's truth to become the stories we're familiar with today. These stories are called folk tales. I'm going to read you The Little Red Hen and The Lion and the Mouse, and we're going to read through these two examples. I want you to jot down what you noticed to share out in our discussion. So I'm going to read them, and in the comments, so I know that you watched the video, I want you to answer one of these questions. What characteristics make up each type of traditional literature? What do these stories have in common, or what is different? So what characteristics in The Little Red Hen make it traditional literature, or in The Lion and the Mouse? So here's the story of The Little Red Hen. The Little Red Hen lived in a barnyard. She spent almost all of her time walking about the barnyard in her pickety-peckety fashion, scratching everywhere for worms. She dearly loved fat, delicious worms and felt they were absolutely necessary to the health of her children. As often as she found a worm, she would call chuck, chuck, chuck to her chickies. But when they were gathered around her, she would distribute choice morsels of her tidbit. A busy little body she was. A cat usually napped lazily in the barn door, not even bothering herself to scare the rat who ran here and there as he pleased. And as for the pig who lived in the sty, he did not care what happened as long as he could eat and grow fat. One day the Little Red Hen found a seed. It was a wheat seed, but the Little Red Hen was so accustomed to bugs and worms that she supposed this to be some new and perhaps delicious kind of meal. She bit it gently and found that it resembled a worm in no way whatsoever. As to taste, although because it was long and slender, a Little Red Hen might easily be fooled by its appearance. Carrying it about, she made many inquiries as to what it might be. She found it was a wheat seed, and that it planted, it would grow up, and when it was ripe, it would be made into flour and then into bread. When she discovered that, she knew it ought to be planted. She was so busy hunting food for herself and her family that naturally she thought she ought not to take time to plant it. So she thought of the pig, upon whom time must hang heavily, and of the cat who had nothing to do, and a great fat rat with his idle hours, and she called loudly, "Who will plant the seed?" But the pig said, "Not I," and the cat said, "Not I," and the rat said, "Not I." "Well then," said the Little Red Hen, "I will," and she did. Then she went on her duties, and through the long summer days, scratching for worms and feeding her chicks, while the pig grew fat, and the cat grew fat, and the rat grew fat, and the wheat grew tall and ready for harvest. So one day the Little Red Hen chanced to notice how large the wheat was, and the grain was ripe. So she ran about, calling briskly, "Who will cut the wheat?" The pig said, "Not I." The cat said, "Not I." And the rat said, "Not I." "Well then," said Little Red Hen, I will. And she did. She got the sickle from another farmer's tools in the barn and proceeded to cut off all the plant of wheat. On the ground lay nicely cut wheat, ready to gather and threshed, but the newest and yellowest and downiest of Mrs. Hen's chicks sat up peep, peep, peeping, in their most vigorous fashion, proclaiming to the world at large, but most particularly to their mother, that she was neglecting them. Poor little red hen! She felt bewildered, and hardly knew where to turn. Her attention was sorely divided between her duties to her children and her duty to the wheat, for which she felt responsible. So again, in a very hopeful tone, she called out, "Who will thresh the wheat?" But the pig with a grunt, "Not I." The cat with a meow, "Not I." The rat with a squeak said, "Not I." So the little red hen, looking, it must be admitted, rather discouraging, said, "Well, I will." Of course, she had to feed her babies first, and as she got them to fall asleep for their afternoon nap, she went out and threshed the wheat. Then she called out, "Who will carry the wheat to the mill ground?" Turned to the back with snippy glee, the pig said, "Not I," the cat said, "Not I," and the rat, "Not I." So the good little red hen could do nothing but say, "I will then," and she did. Carrying the sack of wheat, she trudged off to the distant mill. There she ordered the wheat grounded into perfect white flour. When the miller brought her the flour, she walked slowly back all the way back to her barnyard in her own pickety-peckety fashion. She even managed, in spite of her load, to catch a nice juicy worm now and then, and had one left for the babies when she reached them. Those cunning little fluff balls were so glad to see their mother for the first time they really appreciated her. After this really strenuous day, Mrs. Hen retired to her slumbers earlier than usual. Indeed, before the colors came into the sky to herald the setting of the sun, her usual bedtime hour. She would have liked to sleep late in the morning, but her chicks, joining in the morning chorus of the hen yarn, drove away all hopes of such luxury. Even as sleepily half opened one eye, the thought came to her that day, the wheat must somehow be made into bread. She was not in the habit of making bread, although, of course, anyone can make it if he or she follows the recipe with care, and she knew perfectly well that she could do it necessary. So after her children were fed and made sweet and fresh for the day, she hunted up the pig, the cat, and the rat, still confident that they would surely help her. Some day she sang out, "Who will make the bread?" Alas, the little red hen! Once more her hopes were dashed, for the pig said, "Not I," the cat said, "Not I," and the rat said, "Not I." So the little red hen said once more, "I will then," she said. Feeling that she might have known all the time she would have to do it herself, she went and put on a fresh apron and spotless cook's cap. First of all, she set the dough, as was proper. When it was time, she brought out the molding board and the baking tins, molded the bread, divided it into loaves, put them in the oven to bake, all while the cat sat lazily by, giggling and chuckling, and close as the hand of the vain rat powdered his nose and admired himself in a mirror. In the distance she could hear the long-drawn snores of the dozing pig. At last the great moment arrived. A delicious odor was wafted in the autumn breeze. Everywhere the barnyard citizens sniffed. The red hen ambled in her pickety-peckety way toward the source of excitement. Although she appeared to be perfectly calm, in reality she could only with difficulty restrain an impulse to dance and sing, for had she not done all the work of this wonderful bread, small wonder what she was the most excited person in the barnyard. She did not know whether the bread would be fit to eat, but, joy of joys, when the lovely brown loaves came out of the oven, they were done to perfection. Then, probably because she had acquired the habit, the wren had called, "Who will eat the bread?" All the animals in the barnyard were watching hungrily and smacking their lips in anticipation, and the pig said, "I will." The cat said, "I will." And the rat said, "I will." But the little red hen said, "No, you won't. I will." And she did. The end. Here's the last part, The Lion and the Mouse. A lion lay asleep in the forest, his great head resting on his paws. A timid little mouse came upon him unexpectedly, and in her haste to get away, ran across the lion's nose. Rounded from his nap, the lion laid his huge paw angrily on the tired creature to kill her. "Spare me," begged the poor mouse. "Please let me go, and some day I will surely repay you." The lion was much amused to think that a mouse could ever help him, but he was generous and finally let the mouse go. Some days later, while stalking his prey in the forest, the lion was caught in the toils of a hunter's net. Unable to free himself, he filled the forest with his angry roaring. The mouse knew the voice and quickly found the lion struggling in the net. Running to one of the great ropes that bound him, she gnawed it until it parted, and soon the lion was free. "You laughed when I said I would repay you," said the mouse. "Now you will see that even a mouse can help a lion. A kindness is never wasted." So now that I've read both stories, I want you in the comments to comment. What do you notice? What's the difference? What do they have in common? What do you think makes them traditional literature? So I also want you to create this anchor chart, pause the video, and make sure that you get all of the traits of what traditional literature is. I will post this video so you can watch it independently, and it's going to give you some information that you should have learned. Today and always, as you begin your new books, think back to the features we discussed about traditional literature and what we know about these stories today. Where did they originate? How do you know it's traditional literature? Was it changed or modified over time? What type of traditional literature stories is it?